The spoon trembled in Unteroffizier Wilhelm Hoffmann's hand, the metal utensil feeling alien and heavy as he stared down at the impossible meal. Beef stew, thick with chunks of meat larger than his entire weekly ration, had been in the Africa Corps, swam in a rich, dark gravy. Fresh carrots and peas, not the limp, rotting vegetables he remembered, were mixed in. Beside the bowl sat 2 thick slices of white bread, the wheat aroma genuine, not the sour sawdust scent of German Kriegsbrot. And next to that, a glass of cold milk, the condensation beading on the outside, catching the fierce Texas afternoon sun, so it seemed to glow with an inner light. He blinked, certain it was a mirage, a collective hallucination born of starvation. This cannot be real, he would write in a letter that would take 6 months to reach his mother in a bombed-out Hamburg. They are showing us propaganda food. A performance. Tomorrow, the curtain will fall, and we will get turnip water and sawdust like everyone else. Around him in the vast, newly constructed mess hall, the 850 other German prisoners from Rommel's defeated army sat in a similar, stunned silence. The cacophony of 1,000 men eating had ceased, replaced by a disbelieving hush. These were men who had survived on 200 grams of bread and watery soup made from fodder beets, men whose belts were cinched to the last notch, their uniforms hanging from gaunt frames. Now, they faced individual portions that would have fed an entire Wehrmacht squad for a day. Some men wept silently, tears cutting clean trails through the North African, dust still embedded in their skin. Others sat frozen, their hands in their laps, unable to lift a fork, unable to reconcile the staggering abundance before them with 3 years of relentless Nazi propaganda about a week. Decadent and starving America. What these soldiers, raised on the myth of German superiority and the inevitable triumph of the Third Reich, could not yet comprehend was that they were witnessing the first, visceral shock of the American arsenal of democracy. Not its guns, but its grain. They were experiencing the agricultural and industrial might of a nation that produced more food than it could possibly consume, even while feeding 12 million of its own men under arms and shipping 17 million tons of food aid to its allies. The transformation that would begin with this first meal would, over the coming months and years, systematically demolish every assumption they held about strength, weakness, and the very nature of the world they fought for. To understand the profound psychological impact of this American abundance, one must first comprehend the depths of deprivation from which these soldiers had emerged. By 1943, the German rationing system had deteriorated into a complex, brutal hierarchy of hunger. Civilians were allocated a theoretical 700 calories a day, though often received less. Soldiers in the field were promised 600. But in reality, especially in the isolated theatres like North Africa, they were lucky to receive half that. Feldwebel Werner Mambila, captured with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia, kept a diary that would survive in his family's possession. His last entry before capture. Read May 11th, 1943. Division meal today 150 grams black bread, mostly sawdust, 15 grams margarine, rancid, soup made from 1 potato and desert weeds. The Italians have nothing. We are eating our horses. The men have the eyes of ghosts. The Africa Corps, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, had been reduced to skeletal shadows by the time of the surrender. Rommel himself had complained bitterly to Berlin about the impossible supply situation. Ships carrying food were sunk with relentless efficiency by Allied aircraft and submarines. What little arrived was often spoiled by the relentless heat. By early 1943, German soldiers were suffering from scurvy, beriberi, and protein deficiency diseases that Wehrmacht medical officers hadn't seen since the trenches of the First World War. Oberfeldarzt Friedrich Bauer, a medical officer captured at Kasserine Pass, meticulously documented the physical collapse. The men's gums bled constantly from scurvy. He wrote, "Night blindness from vitamin A deficiency affected nearly a third of the troops. Edema from protein starvation swelled their legs and feet. We had become an army of walking skeletons, held together by little more than discipline and delusion." The surrender in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, brought over 275,000 Axis soldiers into Allied captivity. Among them were the elite of the German military, hardened veterans who had conquered France. Driven the British back to El Alamein, and believed absolutely in German racial superiority and American decadence. The first shock came immediately at the temporary collection points in the North African desert. American quartermasters distributed C rations and K rations to the prisoners. These combat rations, which American GIs complained about constantly, seemed like miraculous feasts to the starving Germans. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, captured with the 90th Light Division, scribbled on a scrap of paper, "The Americans gave us small boxes they called K rations. Inside was more food than I had seen in 2 months. Crackers that weren't mouldy, a tin of meat that was actually meat, chocolate, sugar, even cigarettes. And they apologized. They apologized that this was all they had." The journey to America aboard Liberty ships provided the second, staggering revelation. These vessels, churned out from American shipyards, at a rate German naval officers would have declared impossible, were returning from delivering supplies to Europe. Rather than sail back empty, they carried a human cargo. In the holds, hastily converted for prisoner transport. The Germans encountered American abundance in its most casual, unthinking form. Gefreiter Hans Weber would never forget the sight. The American sailors, he recalled, threw away more food after each meal than my entire company had eaten in a week. Whole loaves of white bread, barely touched, went into the garbage bins. They complained about having chicken too often. I saw one man crush a chocolate bar under his boot because it had melted slightly in the heat. We fought each other like animals to dig through their garbage. The shame was nothing compared to the hunger. A Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, August 1943. As the prisoners disembarked, blinking in the bright coastal light, they encountered a scene that shattered their understanding of wartime reality. Dock workers, many of them women and African. Americans, people whom Nazi ideology had declared incapable of skilled labor, efficiently unloaded ships while eating sandwiches thick with meat and cheese. They drank cola from bottles, and threw them into bins without a second thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. At the processing station, each prisoner received a medical examination that included something unimaginable: vitamin supplements to address their severe nutritional deficiencies. German medical officers, themselves prisoners, worked alongside American doctors who treated cases of malnutrition that more closely resembled concentration camp victims than enemy soldiers. Major William Patterson, a U.S. Army medical officer at Norfolk, filed a report that stated, "The Germans arrived in a state of severe, systemic malnutrition. Average weight was 30 pounds below normal. We observed scurvy, pellagra, beriberi, diseases of starvation we'd only read about in textbooks. We immediately put them on a graduated feeding program to prevent refeeding syndrome. They were not soldiers. They were starving men in uniform." The train journey to the interior camps provided a 3-day, rolling immersion in American agricultural might. As the trains snaked through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, prisoners pressed against the windows, their faces pale against the glass. Watching endless orchards heavy with apples, fields of corn stretching to the horizon, dairy farms with herds of fat, contented cattle. Every small town had a grocery store with windows full of food. restaurants with signs advertising daily specials, ice cream parlors with lines of children and adults. It was a panorama of peace and plenty that contradicted everything they had been told about a nation on the brink of collapse. The American prisoner of war camp system would eventually hold over 425 Zalozan German captives, with 371,683 present at its peak in May 1945. These men were distributed across 700 camps in 46 states. Texas alone hosted approximately 50,000 German POWs in multiple facilities. Its climate deemed similar to North Africa under the Geneva Convention. Camp Hearn, Texas, one of the first to receive Africa Corps prisoners, had been constructed in just 90 days and could hold 800 men. It featured amenities that exceeded what most German soldiers had known as civilians. Electric lights, hot running water, flush toilets, recreation halls with pong tables and libraries, and, most incredibly, mess halls that served 3 hot meals a day. The menu for their first full day, June 5, 1943, was preserved in camp records. Breakfast: oatmeal with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with real cream and sugar, orange juice. Lunch: vegetable soup, roast pork with gravy, mashed potatoes, glazed carrots, bread and butter, apple pie, fresh milk. Dinner: fried chicken, rice, green beans, cornbread, fruit salad, coffee. This single day's menu contained approximately 500 calories, more than German civilians received in 2 days. The meat alone exceeded the monthly ration for a German civilian. Oberschutzhaus Hermann Richter, a former factory worker from the Ruhr, wrote in his diary that night, "I ate until I was sick. Then, God forgive me, I ate more. We all did. Some men hid bread in their bunks. Certain this bounty was a trick, that it would end tomorrow." The American guards laughed and told us there would be the same tomorrow and the day after. We did not believe them. We could not. The sheer, relentless abundance of food in the American camps did more to dismantle Nazi ideology than any propaganda leaflet or education film could have achieved. These soldiers had been taught that America was a weak, divided, and decadent society, its people soft and incapable of sacrifice. Yet here they were, being fed better than Wehrmacht generals, while America simultaneously fought a two-front war across the Atlantic and Pacific. The camp canteen became a daily window into American consumer culture. With the 80 cents they earned daily from labor details, prisoners could purchase items that had vanished from Germany years earlier: Hershey chocolate bars, Lucky Strike cigarettes, razor blades, scented soap, toothpaste, writing paper, and, most incredibly, ice cream. The canteen at Camp Hearn sold over 5,000 ice cream bars weekly to German prisoners who hadn't tasted ice cream since before the war. Gefreiter Fritz Mahler wrote to his wife, "Yesterday I bought ice cream. Oh, ice cream." In Germany, even high-party officials cannot get ice cream, but here, enemy prisoners buy it for 5 cents. The Americans have so much cocoa, so much sugar, so much milk. They feed it to their captives for entertainment. The therapeutic feeding program for the most malnourished prisoners revealed the depth of American medical and nutritional abundance. Prisoners received vitamin B injections, nutritional supplements like Ovaltine, and specialized diets to address their specific deficiency diseases. The camp hospitals were better stocked with supplies than most German field hospitals. Penicillin, the miracle drug that Germany struggled to produce in quantity, was used freely on prisoner infections. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer, wrote with astonishment, "They gave us vitamins in bottles, hundreds of pills, as if they were candy." In Germany, we had no vitamins for our own wounded, for our dying children. Here, enemy prisoners received better medical care than our best civilians could dream of. It makes a mocker of our entire worldview. By October 1943, critical labor shortages in the American home front led to POWs working on local farms and in food processing plants. This direct exposure to the American agricultural and industrial machine completed their ideological demolition. At a cotton gin outside Houston, prisoners witnessed mechanical harvesting that defied comprehension. A single John Deere picking machine did the work of 50 men. The gin processed more cotton in a day than German textile mills saw in a month. But it was the casual, unthinking abundance that truly stunned them. The field workers, including American laborers whom Nazi ideology had declared subhuman, ate lunches that would have been considered feasts in Germany. Thick sandwiches of beef or ham, whole apples, slices of pie, thermoses of coffee with real cream. They threw away half-eaten food without a second glance. Unteroffizier Johann Kellner, working on a farm near Jackson, Mississippi, wrote, "The Negro workers eat meat every day, white bread, fresh fruit. I saw one man throw away a whole apple because it had a small bruise. In Berlin, people would fight each other in the streets for that apple. I have seen the future, and it is not the master race, it is the well-fed race." At a Del Monte processing plant in California, prisoners saw trainloads of peaches transformed into canned fruit through technology that simply did not exist in Germany. The plant processed more fruit in a single day than Germany imported in a year. The workers, they noted, drank orange juice like it was water. Damaged or blemished fruit that would have been treasured in Germany was dumped by the ton into pits for disposal. Nothing, however, shocked the German POWs more than the American relationship with meat. In Germany, civilians received 250 grams of meat per week, when it was available at all. German soldiers were supposed to receive 150 grams daily, but rarely did. In the American camps, prisoners were served meat too, sometimes 3 times a day. The quality astounded them even more than the quantity. This was not horse meat or mysterious canned substances labeled flesh, but recognizable, prime cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Camp Shelby in Mississippi, which housed over 300 German POWs at its peak, went through 14,000 pounds of meat weekly. The camp butcher shop cut steaks, ground hamburger, and prepared roasts with a casualness that seemed almost obscene to men who had watched their families slowly starve. Obergefritter Paul Fisher wrote, "Today for Sunday dinner, we had roast beef, a slab as thick as my thumb. The American guards complained it was a bit tough. In Germany, this would be wedding feast meat, saved for a daughter's marriage. My children have never seen such meat in their lives." Prisoners assigned to work at the Swift & Company meatpacking plant in Fort Worth witnessed the full, terrifying scale of American meat production. The plant processed 5,000 head of cattle every day. Workers, they observed, were allowed to take home packages of beef, liver, and other cuts that would have cost a German laborer a month's wages on the black market. "The waste was magnificent," wrote Helfer Kurt Zimmermann. "They discarded meat for having too much fat. Fat that would have been a treasure in Germany. Used for cooking, for spreading on bread. One single plant here produces more meat in a week than the entire region of Bavaria sees in a year. We have been lied to. We have been fighting a war we could not win against a giant we did not understand." For years, the German soldiers' diet had been one of preservation and scarcity, preserved vegetables, sauerkraut, pickled beets, dried legumes. Fresh fruit had become a distant memory, available only to the party elite. In the American camps, fresh produce arrived daily. The psychological impact of being given a fresh orange at breakfast cannot be overstated. Oranges, tropical fruit, available in June, in Texas, to enemy prisoners. The camps received regular shipments of apples, peaches, pears, grapes, and even bananas. A fruit most Germans hadn't seen since before the war. Unteroffizier Wilhelm Becker wrote, "They gave us oranges at breakfast. not as a special treat, but every day if we wanted. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums in a week. We ate more fruit as prisoners than German children see in a year. How do you explain that to a child who has never tasted a banana? The variety of vegetables seemed infinity: crisp lettuce, ripe tomatoes, sweet corn, green beans, peas, carrots, mountains of potatoes, onions, cabbage, squash. All of it fresh, not preserved. Camp Herne itself maintained a 50-acre vegetable garden worked by the prisoners, who were themselves amazed at the productivity of the American soil and farming methods. Working on private farms, the prisoners encountered an agricultural abundance that fundamentally challenged their understanding of what was possible. In California's Central Valley, where some POWs were transferred for agricultural work, they picked fruit in orchards that stretched for miles. They watched in a kind of horrified fascination as perfectly edible fruit was discarded for minor blemishes or deliberately destroyed to maintain market prices. In Germany, real chocolate had disappeared by 1941, replaced by ersatz chocolate made from roasted acorns and beet sugar. The real thing was rarer than gold. Sugar was rationed to 200 grams per month for civilians. In the American POW camps, chocolate and sweets were everyday items. The Camp PX sold Hershey bars, Baby Ruth, Snickers, Milky Way, brand names that would become legendary among the returning POWs. The psychological impact of this casual availability of luxury foods was devastating. Obergefrieter Kurt Wagner wrote, "I bought 5 chocolate bars with 1 day's wages from working on the farm." 5. In Germany, all the money in the world cannot buy 1 real chocolate bar. What kind of wealth, what kind of power allows a nation to give its enemies chocolate every single day? The camp kitchens baked desserts daily: apple pie, chocolate cake, sugar cookies, rice pudding. Sugar was not rationed, it was on the table in bowls, used liberally in coffee, on cereal, in desserts. The prisoners, many suffering from years of acute sugar deprivation, initially made themselves sick gorging on the sweetness. Dairy products, milk, butter, cheese, cream, that had virtually disappeared from German diets, appeared in staggering abundance. Fresh milk was available at every meal. Butter for bread, cheese for sandwiches, ice cream for dessert. The calcium and protein from these dairy products rapidly improved the prisoners' physical health, filling out their sunken cheeks and rebuilding their atrophied muscles. In Germany, milk was reserved for small children and pregnant women, when available at all. Butter was a black market commodity traded like currency. Cheese was a distant memory. At Camp Herne, the local dairy delivered 500 gallons of milk daily. Prisoners who hadn't tasted fresh milk in years drank it like a healing potion. Unteroffizier Franz Weber wrote, "I drank a full glass of cold milk today. Real milk, not powdered, not condensed. It tasted like peace. It tasted like my childhood, like everything we had lost and were told we could never have again." German coffee, by 1943, was a bitter, roasted brew of barley, acorns, or chicory. In the American camps, real coffee, aromatic, dark, and rich, flowed like water. The psychological impact of unlimited, real coffee cannot be understated for a culture that had prized coffee as central to social life. The smell of it brewing in the vast camp kitchens in the morning, the casual refills at every meal, the ability to drink it with real cream and sugar. These small, daily luxuries delivered more devastating blows to Nazi propaganda than any bomb could. Helfer Friedrich Timmermann confessed in his diary, "The Americans drink coffee all day long. Real coffee from Brazil with cream and sugar. In Germany, my mother stretches 50 grams of ersatz powder for a week, making a thin, brown water that tastes of burnt grain. Which is the decadent society? Which is the strong one?" Even bread, the fundamental staple of the German diet, became another lesson in American abundance. German bread by 1943 was a dark, dense, and heavy mixture of rye, potato flour, and sawdust, rationed to 2,000 grams weekly for a manual labourer. It often arrived mouldy or infested. In the American camps, fresh, soft, white wheat bread appeared at every meal. The camp bakery at Camp Shelby produced over 10,000 loaves a week. This was the bread of luxury, of peace, of a world without want. Gefreiter Paul Schmidt marvelled. White bread, soft as cake, fresh every day. We can take as many slices as we want. There are no limits. In Germany, people are shot for stealing a loaf of bread. Here, the bread is free, and there is always more. As the prisoners were allowed to write home, their letters became vehicles of a devastating, subversive truth that German censors struggled to suppress. How could they explain to families surviving on turnip soup and sawdust bread that they, as prisoners, were eating meat 3 times a day? Many prisoners initially lied in their letters, unable to burden their starving families with the incredible, guilt-inducing truth. Others sent their entire camp earnings home, knowing that the few dollars they could send might buy a single loaf of real bread or a can of meat on the black market, a lifeline their ration cards could never provide. One letter from Unteroffizier Karl Hoffmann to his wife, intercepted by the Gestapo, read, "My beloved Greta, I am well fed here. Do not worry about me. The Americans have more food than they know what to do with. I understand now why they fight. They are not defending themselves from us. They are protecting paradise." What stunned the German POWs even more than the abundance was the American flexibility and compassion in accommodating their dietary and medical needs. Prisoners with specific medical conditions received special diets. Diabetics received sugar-free meals. Those with ulcers received bland diets. This individualized, meticulous care for enemy prisoners exceeded what many German hospitals could provide for their own wounded. The Americans even attempted, where possible, to provide culturally familiar foods, procuring rye flour for darker bread, sauerkraut, and other German staples. This respect for their preferences and identities, this demonstration of a system that valued the individual, stood in stark, damning contrast to the collectivist, expendable ethos of Nazism. Dr. Wilhelm Braun, the senior German medical officer at Camp Shelby, wrote in a report circulated among the POWs, "The Americans spend more effort and resources accommodating the dietary needs and preferences of their enemy prisoners than the Wehrmacht High Command spends on feeding its own front-line soldiers." This is not weakness. This is a different kind of strength, one we were never taught to recognize. As more and more prisoners worked on American farms, they received a practical education in agricultural productivity that would one day reshape post-war Europe. They learned about crop rotation, hybrid seeds, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and large-scale mechanized irrigation. They saw crop yields that German agriculture could not have achieved even in its most prosperous peacetime years. Working on a wheat farm in Kansas, Oberstleutnant Hermann Weber made a calculation that haunted him. "The American farmer I work for," he wrote, "owns 640 acres. He farms it almost entirely alone, with machines. In Germany, this same land would require the labor of an entire village. His combine harvester processes 100 acres of wheat in a single day. He produces more food by himself than my entire district in Bavaria. He is one man. We were told we were the master race of farmers. We were peasants with scythers compared to these people." November 25, 1943, brought another profound psychological shock: Thanksgiving. The prisoners had no cultural context for this uniquely American holiday, but they understood the language of a feast. The meal served at Camp Hearn that day defied their comprehension. Roast turkey with sage stuffing, mashed potatoes with giblet gravy, sweet potatoes topped with melted marshmallows, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, hot rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, coffee, milk, and even a small glass of wine for each man. Each prisoner received a plate heaped with food, a portion that would have fed a German family for a week. The turkey alone, a massive, succulent bird, represented more meat than the monthly German civilian ration. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote that night, "The Americans celebrated a holiday of gratitude by feeding their enemy prisoners like kings. If every family in America is eating a meal like this today, then America is not a country, it is a miracle, a paradise. And we have been trying to destroy it." Prisoners working in American canning factories witnessed food preservation on an industrial scale that Germany could not begin to match. At the Campbell Soup Factory in Camden, New Jersey, they watched the plant produce over 10 million cans of soup a year. The assembly lines moved with a relentless, automated efficiency, filling cans with chicken, beef, and vegetables that German factories could only dream of obtaining. The technology: automatic peelers, continuous cookers, vacuum sealers, was generations ahead. But more shocking than the technology was the quality control. Cans with slight dents, labels printed off center, or seams that were less than perfect were pulled from the line and discarded. The stream of wasted, but perfectly edible, food was greater than the total food production of many German cities. Unteroffizier Fritz Mungleller noted with awe, "They rejected whole pallets of canned goods for having labels printed slightly off-center. Perfect, nourishing food, discarded for a cosmetic flaw. In my city, people would kill for a single one of those cans." Ice cream emerged as the ultimate, almost absurd symbol of American excess and goodwill. In Germany, ice cream had been a rare, pre-war luxury, utterly impossible during the war years. In the American camps, it was routine. Camp Shelby had its own ice cream machine that produced 50 gallons a day during the summer. Prisoners could buy ice cream bars, cones, and cups at the canteen for a few cents. The idea that the enemy, the vanquished, were routinely fed ice cream while German children had never even tasted it, proved emotionally devastating for many. Oberstfreiter Heinz Meer wrote in a letter he never sent, "I ate chocolate ice cream today." In Germany, this would be unimaginable, even for the wealthiest industrialist. Here, prisoners of war, the men who were trying to kill their sons, buy it for pocket change. What kind of world have we been fighting to create? One without ice cream. One where children do not know the taste of chocolate. The physical transformation of the prisoners through proper nutrition was documented meticulously by the American medical officers. Within 3 months of arrival, the average POW had gained 25 to 30 pounds. The scurvy vanished. The night blindness resolved as vitamin stores were replenished. The protein deficiency edema subsided, and their legs returned to a normal size. Major Robert Harrison, chief medical officer at Camp Shelby, reported to his superiors, "The Germans arrived resembling inmates of concentration camps, emaciated, diseased, and mentally dulled by prolonged starvation. 3 months of a balanced, high-protein, high-vitamin diet has transformed them into the healthy, robust young men they should be. The change is not merely physical. Their mental alertness and overall morale have improved dramatically." The prisoners themselves could hardly believe the change in their own bodies. Their muscles returned, their energy levels soared, the constant mental fog of malnutrition lifted. They would look at their reflections in the windows of the mess hall and see, for the first time in years, the faces they remembered from before the war. But with this returning health came a crushing, pervasive guilt. How could they enjoy 3 full meals a day, meat, fruit, and chocolate, while their families were scrounging for potato peels and burning furniture for warmth? The undeniable truth: that their American captors were feeding them better than their own government was feeding their wives and children, was a pain too acute to share. An unsent letter from Unteroffizier Paul Fischer, found tucked in his diary after the war, captured this anguish. My dear wife, I cannot tell you the truth. I eat meat every day while you starve. I am safe in a warm barracks while you huddle in a bombed, out cellar. The Americans treat me, your enemy husband, with more humanity and provide me with more sustenance than our own fatherland provides for you. My heart is breaking from the shame of it. Christmas of 1943 delivered another profound psychological blow. American church groups, civic organizations like the Rotary Club, and the Red Cross coordinated to send over 500,000 Christmas packages to the German POWs. Each contained chocolates, cookies, canned ham, cigarettes, soap, and shaving kits. Local communities near the camps added their own contributions: homemade fudge, knitted scarves, hand-drawn cards from Sunday school children. These gifts were distributed to every prisoner, regardless of rank or political affiliation. This egalitarian generosity, emanating from the very civilians whose sons and husbands they had been trying to kill just months before, shattered the last remnants of Nazi racial theory and the concept of a monolithic, hate-filled enemy. Helfer Werner Klein wrote home, American civilians, whose sons are fighting and dying in Europe, sent us Christmas gifts. Churches prayed for our souls. Little children sent us cards wishing us a Merry Christmas. Only a people who are absolutely, unshakably certain of their own virtue and their ultimate victory show such charity to their defeated enemies. We were taught they were weak. This is the greatest strength I have ever witnessed. By early 1944, the food in the American camps had become an inadvertent, yet powerful, education system. The prisoners learned about the importance of vitamins, balanced diets, and food safety. They discovered that adequate nutrition improved not just physical health, but also productivity, mood, and mental clarity. The camp libraries, often stocked by local donations, included American agricultural journals and cookbooks. The more curious prisoners pored over these texts, studying American farming methods, food processing technology, and nutritional science. They began to understand that American agricultural abundance was not an accident of nature, but the result of scientific research, mechanization, and a free, efficient system of distribution. Obergefreiter Friedrich Becker, a former agricultural student, wrote, "The Americans have turned farming into a precise science. They test their soil, they breed better crops in laboratories. They use chemistry to increase yields and fight pests. It is a continuous, organized effort to create plenty. No wonder they have so much food. We were trying to conquer land. They were learning how to make the land provide." As 1944 progressed, and the news from Germany, filtered through censored letters and secret radio broadcasts, grew increasingly grim. The contrast between their lives of POW abundance and the starvation at home became almost unbearable. Letters that managed to slip past the censors told of cities reduced to rubble, of civilians boiling grass and nettles for soup, of children dying from malnutrition and disease. Meanwhile, the German prisoners in America were complaining about the monotony of the menu, about having chicken too often, about the quality of the pie crust. The moral and intellectual foundation of Nazism crumbled not in the face of Allied bombs, but in the face of American beefsteak and apple pie. How could the self-proclaimed master race be slowly starving to death, while the people they were taught were their inferiors wasted more food than the Reich could produce? The ideology was dead, killed not by argument, but by the irrefutable evidence of a full stomach. The Negro who empties our garbage pails. One prisoner wrote, "He eats better at home than a German major. The theory is a lie. It was always a lie. The summer of 1944 brought fresh, almost overwhelming revelations as the prisoners worked through the peak of America's agricultural season. They picked peaches in the orchards of Georgia, harvested tomatoes in the fields of New Jersey, and worked as hired hands in the vast wheat fields of Kansas. The sheer, staggering volume of the food production overwhelmed their senses and their understanding. In a single day at a Georgia peach orchard, a work detail of POWs picked and packed fruit that would have supplied a major German city for a month. The perfect, unblemished peaches were sorted by size and quality for the fresh market. Slightly imperfect fruit was sent to canneries. Fruit that was too ripe or damaged was dumped into vast pits to be used as pig feed or simply left to rot. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "Today, we fed peaches to pigs. Thousands of them, each one a golden, juicy treasure. Peaches that were too ripe for shipping were given to the swine." In Stuttgart, people would weep and fight each other for a single one of these fruits. I think I am going mad from the spectacle of it. An incident at Camp Shelby in July of 1944 perfectly captured the surreal psychological impact of this abundance. Local farmers, as a gesture of goodwill for the 4th of July, donated several truckloads of watermelons for a celebration. Most of the German POWs had never seen a watermelon before. This exotic, giant fruit simply did not exist in their homeland. The prisoners were given whole melons to share among their barracks. Many didn't know how to eat them, tentatively tasting the sweet red flesh after watching the American Guards. Grown men, hardened veterans of the Desert War, wept at the taste. The sheer, profligate abundance of sugar and water in this bizarre, festive form. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt described the scene. "They gave us giant green fruits, striped like a carnival, full of sweet, red flesh. Each one could feed a family for a day. The American Guards ate only the heart of the slice and threw the rest, still thick with good fruit, into the garbage. A nation that can use food as entertainment, that can waste it so casually, has already won the war. They have won it with seeds and soil, not with bullets." Working in the corn fields of Iowa provided another fundamental shock to their agricultural understanding. Iowa alone produced more corn than all of Germany produced of all grains combined. But the most staggering fact, one that their farmer employers explained casually, was that the majority of this colossal harvest was not for human consumption, but for animal feed. The very concept of dedicating millions of acres of prime farmland to grow food for pigs and cattle, to convert grain into meat, was a luxury of such magnitude that it was almost incomprehensible to men from a land where every scrap of arable land was dedicated to direct human sustenance. Feldwebel Hermann Fischer wrote, "The farmer I worked for explained that the corn was mainly for his hogs and for cattle feed. They grow food to feed to animals to make meat. The Americans have so much grain, such an endless surplus, that they can afford to convert it into meat through animals. We were trying to conquer the black soil of Ukraine for bread, and they have more than they know what to do with." At a sugar beet processing plant in Colorado, German POWs witnessed sugar production on a scale that defied all reason. Germany had suffered severe sugar shortages for years, with civilians receiving 200 grams per month if they were lucky. The Colorado plant processed 5,000 tons of sugar beets every single day, producing literal mountains of pure, white sugar. The workers at the plant, they observed, were often paid partially in 5-pound bags of sugar, which they used with a liberality that was shocking. A worker would pour what amounted to 2 months of a German sugar ration into a single cup of coffee. Obergefreiter Paul Weber watched this ritual with a kind of fascinated horror. "I watched a man, a common labourer, pour half a cup of sugar into his coffee. This was not a rich man. This was not a party boss. This was an ordinary American. And he dissolved what would be 2 months of German sugar rations into a single cup of coffee, without a thought. It was then I knew the war was not just a military defeat, but a cosmological one. We were from 2 different planets. POWs working at Gulf Coast ports, like Galveston, witnessed American fishing fleets bringing in catches that dwarfed the entire output of the German deep sea fishing industry. Shrimp boats, targeting only the valuable crustaceans, would dump tons of bycatch, perfectly edible fish like red snapper and grouper, back into the sea because they were not the intended, profitable species. The concept of discarding tons of nutritious food, because it was not the preferred type of food, was so alien, so wasteful, that it struck the prisoners as a kind of blasphemy. Gefreiter Hans Memmuller wrote, "They threw tons of fish, beautiful, silvery fish, back into the sea dead, because they were the wrong kind. They were fishing for shrimp, and the fish were a nuisance." In Hamburg, people would fight each other with knives for a single one of those fish heads. I have seen the face of heaven, and it is wasteful beyond belief. At dairy farms in Wisconsin, German POWs encountered milk production that seemed to belong to the realm of science fiction. Single farms produced more milk daily than entire districts in Germany. The technology, mechanical milkers, refrigerated stainless steel tanks, automated pasteurization equipment, was decades ahead of German farming practices. But, as always, it was the casual attitude toward plenty and waste that left the deepest mark. Milk that was a day past its prime was often dumped out to fertilize fields. Cream was separated and used with a liberality that was unheard of. Butter was churned in quantities that could have supplied entire German cities. Unteroffizier Fritz Wagner, assigned to a Wisconsin farm, recorded his disbelief. "The farm where I work has 100 cows. It produces over 1,000 gallons of milk every day. From one farm, when a tank was slightly contaminated, the farmer poured 500 gallons onto his field as fertilizer. He said it was easier than cleaning the tank. 500 gallons of milk. In Munich, that milk could save 1,000 children from rickets. I no longer understand the world." At an industrial egg farm in Maryland, prisoners were introduced to a scale of poultry production unknown in Europe. The farm housed 50,000 chickens in long, automated henhouses, producing nearly 40,000 eggs each day. Conveyor belts collected the eggs, washed them, sorted them by size, and packed them into cartons. In Germany, civilians received 1 egg per week on their ration cards, when available. The American prisoners of war received eggs, scrambled, fried, or boiled, almost every day for breakfast. The Maryland farm shipped trainloads of eggs to cities along the East Coast. Gefreiter Wilhelm Becker tried to explain the scale in a letter. "Each henhouse holds more birds than our